welcome everybody. It's nice to see you. Nothing that's my fault, but I'm sorry you couldn't have gotten the warrant at your houses before now. We did everything we could. I signed the warrant the day after and it got posted, so it is what it is. That would have been nice, but somehow we'll make it through this. So, I'm Jimmy Recor. At the actual town meeting, I'm the actual moderator, for lack of anybody else wanting to be, more than likely. But, Mary and I and Ruth Parnell long ago decided to try to do something like this, so we're a little more tuned into everything, what's hot, what seems to be important to people at town meeting by having a pre-town meeting a couple weeks before. And it's worked right along so far for the most of us, so we're doing it again. So, I gave a little extra time because we didn't have a warrant out, but the first article that had 3 check marks, there was a couple, was Article 29.
Hey, Jimmy,
Yes.
I interrupt you. Will you do your little speech about how we talk nice to each other, only you say it better than that?
Okay.
We all play in the sandbox nicely together.
Well, no, we need to leave the rest of the world and the way it's running outside of here, and treat each other. Everybody's here because they are interested and want to have a say in how the town of Conway runs. So while we're in here, we respect each other. We don't make personal attacks. We treat each other, like I say, with the respect you would expect to be treated with if you were speaking or interacting with other people. And if somebody has a different opinion than you, that's what you're looking for, really. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means their life experiences have led them to a different conclusion than you have. That's perfectly fine in America. And that's the way we're going to keep it here. Can we agree on that?
Yes.
Good.
Thanks, thank you, Jim.
Sure. Article 29, to see if the town will vote to eliminate the municipal caucus for the nomination of candidates for town offices and authorize the select board to file a home rule petition with the general court for such purposes as follows. And all this really means is we're doing away with town caucus. So if you're going to run for a position, Chris,
I can speak to this.
please do.
Okay. First of all, we have a new member of our community here, Sandor.
Can you identify yourself?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm Chris Waldo. I am the select board chair. I'm also on the capital improvement committee. Sandor is our new resident for the town. So everybody knows we have a lot of department heads here. We have the chief of our fire department, the chief of our police department, the highway super. There's the whole select board is here. We have Elaine and Erica and myself. There's members of our planning board. There's members of our finance committee, our capital improvement committee. A lot of committees are here.
School committee.
School committee, yes, thank you.
Personnel.
So this article, the reason this is brought up is because at the last caucus, since Lori, who is our town clerk, is not here to say it, there were 2 people there, me and Lori. And at every caucus prior to that, at least the ones that I have been to in the 4 years I've lived here, we have always had to struggle to get, was it 35? 25. Only 25 people in that room for the caucus. Whether we had to go to the Conway Inn, which isn't the greatest thing in the world, to go to a bar to try to get people to vote on town, to try to get people to vote on town appointments, or
We've involved pickleballers before.
but taking people away from pickleball just to come down and do the caucus. So what we've had to do, at least in this last time, was you get 10 signatures on a form and you can put your name on the ballot. That's all you really need. So the caucus has failed to get the number of people needed for a considerable amount of years, at least 4 years, probably prior to that. So Lori, who's here, our town clerk, is putting this forward, so we don't have to set up again and be disappointed again. Does anybody have any questions to that?
Explain the process again.
Yes, so-
When there was a caucus and now that there might not.
It's the same process, except instead of verbal and signing your name at the actual caucus, whoever is running for the appointment has forms that they need to fill out. There's financial disclosure, and then there's the form for candidacy, right?
So instead of being nominated at caucus, what you're gonna do is you're gonna go see the town clerk and take out papers.
Yeah.
Take out nomination papers, 10 signatures. You have a date to bring them back by.
Yes.
It's relatively easy.
And historically, because I've been to many caucuses over the years, and yes, it is like, you know, literally like
Yes.
walking across the street, knocking on doors, trying to get people to come over.
Yeah.
But if you're not nominated at the caucus, that, you can still take out papers.
Correct.
So maybe like 2 or 3 people would be nominated at the caucus, but,
Right.
over the course of the next week, like 5 other people filed papers. So it
Yeah.
wasn't an actual requirement. It was kind of like this antiquated, archaic New England tradition, which I agree is like lovely.
And you brought something up that reminded me is also at the caucus, if you're not there,
You're gonna get
you're gonna get nominated. Like, no joke, that happens. So,
You get voluntold.
yes,
Yes, you do.
exactly.
That actually happens in a lot of the organizations that I'm in. The worst thing you want to do is
not
not
be
go
there.
to that meeting.
Yeah. Yep. So, any questions any further questions?
And this just is going to the general court, to the state, to say that we don't want to do it that way anymore, right? That's why we're doing this. We
I
go to town
think
meeting and then-
Would you know that, Natalie? I don't know.
Technically, we have to, it has to be a special piece of legislation
Yeah.
So it'll be,
allowing us
it'll be a
to.
formal petition
Yeah.
that'll come to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause
Right.
it's a petition to change how you
Right,
operate.
right, right.
Natalie Blair, state representative.
How many of these do you come to a year? Pre-town meetings?
This is the one. You are very unique and very
Because we're the
special.
only one.
So yes, it would be a whole rule petition if approved by, we would then shepherd it through boards.
Okay? Any other questions about Article 29? Okay. Next, we move to Article 24. Article 24, to see if the town will vote to appropriate $43,419 for the administration and implication of the town's open space and recreation plan, and to meet said appropriation, the town shall transfer the remaining balance of $43,419 in the Small Cities Grant Fund 416 to the general fund or take any action relative thereto. Explanation. Introduce yourself.
I'm Janet Shays, Chair of the Open Space Committee. In 2016, the prior town administrator came to our committee and said they liked what the improvements that were just beginning in the South River Meadow, and he wanted us to undertake some similar or whatever was appropriate at the Bigelow Meadow, which is also a town-owned property, quite neglected. And he said there was a special grant fund that we could use to implement these activities, as well as a host of others, which are in the town's open space and recreation plan. It's an extensive, beautiful report, which is online under the Open Space Committee. The prior town administrator had checked with the town accountant at the time, who was the supervisor for FERCog County. Anyway, we spent just a little bit of that money. But it's always been sort of set aside in the back of our mind that this can help implement these ambitious goals we have for most native plant restoration and cleanup of a number of town and public properties sort of long term. Well, the current town administrator and the current accountant could not find authorization, could not find a written authorization. So this is just really a clarification for the books of appropriate set aside for those monies.
And Erica Goldman, I'm on select board. Just to clarify, not only they couldn't find evidence of that authorization, we couldn't find any documentation at all of like how this grant money got to the town, who signed for it, what the original grant was. There's no record keeping from that period apparently, at least for this grant. But based upon what we were able to find from the federal government when the small cities grant was a thing, 15, 20 years ago, and given, the conversations that Janet had, with the previous town administrator, this seems like this is the appropriate place for this money. Obviously, we were given this chunk of funds, and the federal regulations that we can find support that this would be an appropriate use of this money. So if we don't transfer it to the Open Space Committee, then it's just, we have this money sitting there that we have to decide what to do with it. But we felt pretty strongly that, from what we understand, this is what the money was intended to be spent for.
Mary?
So basically, the original grant funded making that plan, but there was leftover, and this could fund the implementation of the plan. Is that the basic idea?
This is done like every 7 years, and it may have, the original grant came in the 90s. It may have funded some of that. Some of these are funded from a couple of different sources. The last one that we did, but I think it's appropriate. It needs to be done if we're going to continue.
Because open space is doing a lot of active management of the property and making the
Can you identify yourself
Sure.
also, please?
I'm Elaine Campbell, also on select board, former member of Open Space Committee back in the day. But they do a lot of work to maintain and make these very useful and contributing properties to the town. Both in terms of nature and in terms of how they're not going to be taken over by invasives. Didn't you just have a root pulling
Yes.
competition? Was it a competition?
Yes, yes, yes.
This past weekend. They're very active at caring for these properties that were not going to be cared for otherwise.
We need a lot of help.
Yeah, so it's mostly checks and balances. Chris Waldo again, select board. It's mostly checks and balances. The funds are already there. We're not acquiring new funds. It's more about having, showing where the funds originated and where they're intended to go to.
Known as the audit.
Appropriating, yes. Appropriating.
Full transparency.
Appropriately. Yes. Thanks.
Anything else? Any other questions? Thank you very much for that.
2/3 vote though we need,
Yeah.
apparently. So I guess they decided that, so we need people to come to town meeting and stay and vote.
People will come, they just need to stay, they need to vote. Okay, let's go to Article 9. Article 9 is to see if the town will vote to approve the creation of a new highway stabilization fund to be used for purchase of highway vehicles and equipment, or take any action relative thereto.
Chris Waldo, Select Board Capital Improvement Committee. So as everyone probably already knows, we have various stabilization funds. One for the fire department pumper truck. We had one for the EMS ambulance. The highway department has very expensive vehicles as well. We thought that it would be appropriate to have such a fund for such vehicles as a grader, which can cost in excess of 400,000. As you'll see, excavators, which are over 100,000, even the crew cab pickup trucks nowadays are costing above 85,000. Who knows where they're going to go with tariffs? So we thought it appropriate to also have a stabilization fund for the highway department that would account for large purchase items such as this.
Grammar school also has stabilization.
Yes, grammar school, which is going to be used for boilers, HVAC systems. Yes.
What's the definition of a stabilization fund? Is it?
Yes, so a stabilization fund is where you're allocating a certain amount of funds into an account that is set up to purchase a particular item or items. In that fund, really the way to explain is there's a separate way of voting for or using money that's in a stabilization fund as opposed to free cash. Free cash, it's a majority vote. Stabilization, it's a 2/3 majority. So this would not only help show visually, show where we want to allocate money for larger pieces of equipment, but offer the town a higher percentage of vote to make sure that that large order is justifiable with the entire town.
I serve with Chris on capital.
What's your name?
I'm Phyllis Crane. I just want to say too that the benefit of a stabilization fund is that it allows you to sort of think into the future, because especially when you have really expensive pieces of equipment, because it's always in front of people every year as you're socking money away in a stabilization fund for a new fire truck or a new ambulance or new highway equipment. So, it's a much easier way to manage those particular town needs, in my opinion, than just every year saying we need this for this big piece of highway equipment.
It's a gargantuan layaway.
That's
What we used to do, you buy stuff out of
Very
it
good way to put it.
after you pay it.
That's exactly.
Yeah, you pay it over time. So that's another good point is let's use the pumper truck as an example. We've been stashing away the last 3 years, I believe 100,000 each year for the pumper truck. I think the initial cost that we anticipated was under 400,000. It's closer to 900,000 right now. So the same thing would be with the grader. Currently, when we were first looking at a grader needing replaced, it was around 300. It's up to 4 now, only 3 years later, and then it's going to continue to rise. So we can't ask the town to give us 400,000.
Right.
So we'd have to put away allocate a certain amount each year to build up to that purchase. So that's another huge reason for stabilization funds.
Hold on. You first, please.
Deb Donaldson, Forest and Trails Committee. So you're saying eventually we would have enough money so that the highway department wouldn't have to come every year and say, give us another $400,000, that they would have this fund to buy the equipment they need? Or-
Not really, no. This
So
would
they're
just be
still
for
going to be
much.
asking for additional funds in addition to the.
Yeah, and you'll see other articles on there for the highway department.
Yeah, I did.
And we've done a lot of articles recently. What we're trying to get to with the highway department is the structure of 5 to 7 year turnaround time. We're almost there. If we get these 2 items, there's 2 additional items that the highway department's gonna need in the next couple of years, and then I think there's a lag of 3-4 years after that.
Which point we've been building up this fund so that the next big thing that came along, we hopefully would have.
Yes, you hopefully
at
already
least
have
a
money
big chunk
allocated
of what
for
we
it.
need.
Correct.
Okay.
Nelson Chiclet.
So this question would apply to CPA funds, money that's sitting around, right? What happens, we put money in a stabilization fund, where do those funds reside?
That's a good question.
Well, they're invested.
Yeah, they're,
Well, are we-
oh yeah, we have the,
They're all invested. They're all getting a return.
right.
John Crane.
My husband.
Yeah, I mean, town treasurer would tell you exactly where they are, but we employ, a financial management company that manages the funds for the town. So, the funds the accounts are not managed individually. We have a big bolus of
I
cash
assume
that sits,
that's
right, yeah. And then the treasurer knows how much is going in each account. So.
I think they're identified in the annual town report, but there's a whole bunch of financial documents.
Yes,
in
you
there,
can also see it
including
as
like
Yeah.
numbers from-
Yeah.
And again, one of the big differences is that depending upon where the money comes from, it either requires a 50% majority vote or a two-thirds
Two-thirds.
majority vote.
Correct.
We started this a number of years ago in the school committee before other committees were doing it because we knew that the life expectancy of the boilers in the school were coming to an end. And they are really coming to an end now, but now instead of going to the town or having an emergency that we suddenly need $500,000 or more, we have been setting aside money and planning for that to happen, whereas some other schools in the district have not had that luxury, and then they either have to borrow or they have to do something else. And then if something happens and say a road grader drops from the sky in our laps and we don't need one anymore, the money goes back to free cash?
We'd have to do another vote,
Yes.
town vote for that to happen, but yes.
So,
I would suspect it would stay in the stabilization fund.
yeah.
You just wouldn't fund that fund for a while.
Ron Sweet.
Is it true that the stabilization funds can be used for anything though?
No.
Town vote?
Well, town vote, yes.
Town vote can take money from the stabilization fund and
The
use
town
it.
vote can, yes. You are correct.
So it's just, hopefully it gets used for the stabilization that it's put in.
Yeah. Which has happened before. I think it happened a couple of years ago. They took it out one stabilization. Yeah.
I mean, we've saved a lot of money for the fire truck, and if by some miracle we don't have to buy a fire truck ourselves, then that's just
Right.
money that we've saved that the town, that goes back to free cash that the town still has.
Keep your fingers crossed on that one.
Okay, anything else on that article? Okay. Okay, keeping with the same theme, Article 12, by the way, to see that the town will vote to transfer $44,000 from capital stabilization for the purchase of a highway tractor, or take any action relative thereto.
I can take it, you can take it, what do you want? Everybody's seen the tractor.
For the 43,000?
Yes.
So the tractor that we have now, we use for snow blowing the sidewalks in the wintertime. Roadside mowing, blowing leaves off the roads. It has several attachments that we have for it. We have to, the tractor is a small tractor so that it fits down the sidewalks. So 90% of what we use it for is basically overtaxing the tractor because we can't get a bigger one with more horsepower without spending like 4 times that money. So the tractor's 5 years old, 6 years old now. Just trying to keep ahead of so that we don't have to start putting large repairs into the tractor. The other thing is with the dollar amount that's on there, there is no trade, no expectation out of what's gonna happen to the old one, other than we will be getting rid of it. But it might make more sense to put it out to auction, so the money comes back to the town, probably back to the general fund, and then it can be redistributed by the select board at the following year. But just the way trade-ins have been going recently, it's probably makes some sense to check out, doing an auction, putting it to an auction. So there's no money, all that money is to buy a new tractor, not to dispose of the old one, so there'll be a fair amount of money coming back, I would assume. Probably somewhere in the $7,000 to $10,000.
Question?
Ron, will all the old attachments fit on the new tractor?
Good question. Anybody else? Okay. Let's do this. Article 3. To see if the town will vote to set the salaries of elected officials as provided by Mass General Law, Section 41, or C41, Section 108, to be made effective from July 1st, 2026, as presented in the budget. As presented in the budget. Stop there.
This is just, it's called COLA, cost of living adjustment, 3% for town employees.
That has to be voted every year?
Yes. Yes.
That's great. This is housekeeping.
Yes.
Yeah, we tried to front load the warrant with all of the stuff that's like, that our town attorney said, like, it's just a formality, we have to do it every year. So,
Article 13, to see if the town will vote to transfer $200,000 from the state disaster relief funds for the purchase of a used highway grader.
Same thing we discussed before. We have 64 miles of roadway in Conway, if I'm correct, and 24 of those are gravel. Plenty of us probably, some of us in here probably live on some of those roads, whether it's Roaring Brook or Cricket Hill or
Main Poland Road?
Main Poland, exactly. And what's the big one? Reeds.
Reeds
and
Bridge.
Reeds and the
Great.
Graves.
I know.
Grave Road, yes. So, you know, when I first joined, I also joined the Capital Improvement Committee my first year, 3 years ago. The grader came up. So there were plenty of other items that were up for the highway department as well. Given that the grader was such a high cost and that we had a rental option at the time that was working out, every year I've said keep it off the request. It's getting harder and harder for the highway department to continue use of a rented grader because other municipalities need it as well. You never know when it's going to be available. Obviously, you have a highway department employee or two who have to go pick it up, bring it back. It costs town money. Ron was able to find a used grader for half the cost of the new. We still have funds left over from the flood disaster that happened a couple years ago.
Can I correct that?
Yes, you may.
They're not really left over. They're pretty much spoken for. It's just that one of the items that we would be using it for is renting a grader.
Right.
Because the roads, just about every dirt road got damaged during the floods. And they all are in real need of being reshaped. We put them back together so that people can travel on them and we can plow them and stuff. But the grader is a big need for the gravel roads right now, and that's where this was coming from.
Thank you, Ron. And anybody who was here for the floods could have gone around and saw, if you went down like Whately, I'm sure you saw that Fields Hill, like it was in Whately.
It was in the swimming pool of Fields Hill.
Yeah, Cricket Hill was majorly damaged. You know, Roaring Brook had half of it, half the road was gone. So a grader is a huge need for our community given how many dirt and gravel roads we have. So this would help cover the cost of a used grader, which would have a long lifespan, right? 10 plus years.
I mean, we're probably looking at a 10-year-old
Yeah.
used grader, but
Right.
it won't come from another municipality. It'll have to come from a road company.
Jen, is there any trading value on the old road grader we have now? And I know it's not being used, but is there any?
Well, we still use it, it's just that it's not, it has issues, so trying to grade all the roads, it's asking a lot out of that thing, so.
Would that be traded in toward this other used road grader?
It probably wouldn't get traded in, it'd probably we'd get rid of it, auction it off or whatever.
So there's some value there.
Probably 10, 20,000.
That's good. Anyone else on this? Okay. Article 23. Believe it or not, I thought we had more checks than it did, but to see if the town will vote to transfer $14,052 from free cash for a one-time costs associated with migrating the town's electronic files to Microsoft Cloud.
I can speak to that.
I was hoping you could speak.
So we have for many years had a local resident, Roy Cohn, who is on our finance committee, who's basically been our town IT guy. That's been great. Roy is retiring, so we have to find a new IT guy, and we have we basically have a company, a managed service company that we're going to contract with to provide all of the tech support for the town. And one of the things that they've recommended is that instead of having individual servers, like physical machines that we have in the buildings, basically transfer all of our data management to the cloud, which is pretty. I mean, I don't know if anyone is in IT like I am, but cloud is like up there. You don't, it's all of our files and things are managed on servers that we don't physically own. They basically, belong to someone else, and they're taking care of them. So this is a one-time cost for us to do that transition, to basically get us to the point where we have a company that's, managing all of our IT services instead of one person, which we have right now. And Roy's been great, but it's going to be a game changer to have, basically a 24/7 on-call IT company. If someone can't get into their email, or someone loses a document that they were working on. So this is basically this one-time cost to do that conversion, basically, where they come in, they take our files, they take our servers, they move everything, they put it in a secure place in the cloud for us, and then we are good to go.
It's very standard. Obviously, servers cost money. Not only that, but like Erica said, Roy was our IT guy. There was no contingency. So if Roy gets sick, something happens to
Goes
Roy,
to Mexico.
we're in bad shape. So the company we're going to be using is called SourcePass. It's an IT firm with multiple resources at our disposal.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, what's gonna happen with the old servers?
Well, the servers wouldn't be needed if you have.
I know, but can you get some?
That I don't know.
They're you could get like $25 from it.
Yeah.
It's not, yeah. But again, so we don't have to upgrade, buy a new server every 3 or 4 years, which normally you do if you were managing your own services.
I presume there's going to be an annual cost for renting or...
So that's actually in the budget. There is an annual cost now for our IT services, which is not significantly more than we were paying for, Roy services. So yeah, we will still continue to have an annual
But that
IT
includes
support cost.
hardware support too, when people need new
Yes.
laptops,
Yeah,
they
it's-
can load
yeah,
it, they can have all the apps they need.
Yeah, it's hardware and software, and like I said, it's 24/7. So if I can't get into my email at 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't know why I would want to, but normally I would call Roy, but now I
Create a ticket.
exactly. So it's kind of it's sort of like a modern standard way of managing IT services, and this company SourcePass works with a lot of municipalities in Commonwealth.
Yes.
Celia Van Dyke, Whately Road. I just am wondering about the I know that this is very, I feel like I'm like a sort of tech savvy Luddite, and I just am wondering about the sort of the safety of having everything on the cloud, and does it open us up as a town to different sort of risks of, I feel like every once in a while, right, a huge hospital server gets hacked, or sometimes the town gets hacked, and so are there different risks with putting everything in one cloud server that
No, because it's actually probably less.
It's less
Phishing.
Okay.
Phishing, you can get into any network, if it's connected to a server, they can access that as easily as they could access the cloud, if not easier.
And there are service level agreements too, as well. So there's certain things like security protocols that are in place. And, you know, like if we can't get into our email for, you know, whatever, 12 hours, there's definitely like, you know, consequences, repercussions, and this is all kind of built into it.
And they'll have additional like software that'll flag, you know, phishing emails or links where we don't have that right now.
And where's all our accounting? Is that all our financial records, is that on the servers currently, or is that hosted by some?
No, I mean, everything's on servers.
Yeah, but everything will be posted. So I mean, really, it will be like much more secure. Like we've done security audits, so we feel pretty confident that this is.
There's definitely a lot of modernization that's needed. You know, we're even doing that in the capital improvement committee, is where we have a spreadsheet that shows everything from year to year since we started 3 years ago. And it's on a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet's accessible from Conway Gov website. We're trying to lean towards, you know, modernization as much as possible, but there is a large amount to it. And Lori, who's here, has actually been a big part of that as well. In scanning old documents and getting those posted, where you'd be able to search words even on 200-year-old scanned documents. So, yeah, SourcePass is going to be a major. It's always been great, but it will be a major upgrade as far as not only security but service as well.
Anything else on that? Okay, let's go to Article 32. To see if the town will vote to amend the general bylaws of the town of Conway, bylaw town officers, boards, and committees, Section 2 as follows. Section 2. Only Conway residents shall be allowed to serve as voting members of boards, committees, and commissions, except that a serving member of the Planning Board or Zoning Board of Appeals who becomes a non-resident may A, continue as a member until the end of their appointed or elected term, and, or B, be appointed for one-year terms by the Select Board as an associate member of the same board on which they served if such first appointment is made within 18 months of becoming a non-resident.
Chris Waldo. So, poor Jeff from the planning board. Last town meeting tried to get an article passed that would allow non-residents to be on voting committees. I was very much opposed to that. Mary, I believe you actually said something as well. Completely in opposition of such a thing for various reasons why, self-interest outside of Conway. But Jeff brought up to me, well, what about if someone's already on committee and they need to move? And brought this forward, and I thought this was acceptable. If we have somebody who joins a committee that's a 3-year committee, a 3-year term, something happens where they need to move halfway through in a year and a half, that they can serve out the rest of their term, even if they aren't physically a Conway resident, if they were voted as a Conway resident at the time of the appointment.
And Chris, I can give you an example of that. I'm also on zoning. So let's say, for example, that we are in the middle of a zoning variance issue that took several weeks or months. And if anybody was here when Vertex came in to do the tower, you know, that subsequently got canceled off of 116, say somebody on zoning was part of that public hearing process. It was going through the votes, the public hearings were happening. One member of the zoning board of appeals has to move out of town because they need to move to New Hampshire to take care of their mother. So that's an example of somebody who was invested and involved in a regulatory process that is already in process, that needs to move to its resolution and its final vote, and that individual has to be available to the town so that that process can still continue.
And this all kind of came up, the prior article that got voted down, and this is the adjustment to that. Because we had a member of our community that all of us appreciated, was a huge part of the community, Joe Sukowski. He had to move away. Once he moved away, well, he wasn't on the committee anymore to vote. And I have always said that you do not write rules, regulations, or job descriptions based on the person. It's on the actual job itself. So that's why I was opposed to it. I'm still opposed to that type of amendment. I'm sorry, to that type of vote, but this amendment I feel makes sense. Again, all it basically states is that if you are voted in, you have to move for whatever reason in your term that you can carry out your term.
Yeah, I mean, I love Joe Stragowski, worked with him on the planning board, learned a ton from him. And I spoke against the article last year because it was very broad, very vague, and didn't, it was broad and vague. And this is much more specific, and this seems like it's reasonable, especially like those kinds of examples. I'm curious about, it designates that it's planning board and zoning board of appeals, not, school committee or some other boards or committees. And I'm curious about what the rationale was. I mean, the example of the regulatory process that we're talking about with the zoning board of appeals, that makes sense, but how did it get that those two were the, and I think this is a question that will come up at town meeting, which is why we do all this. This is practice for all of you who get to answer the questions at town meeting. But, why those two, and could there be are there any other committees or boards like that, something, the similar thing can come up?
First part is easy, it was requested by those boards. So that's why it was requested by the planning board and zoning board of appeals. Could it be done for other committees? Sure. Has the request been out there? No. I don't feel we need to do a broad vote between all committees. I don't think I would like to see a select board member who doesn't live in town making, I don't even know how that would work because you have to physically be here.
Yeah,
So,
this is something to think about, looking at all the different boards and committees. Like, I'm thinking about Board of Health.
I actually think that's out of scope for what we're discussing, because this is just for these two boards, that's a hypothetical.
Well, I think it is, and it isn't, and it will come up at town meeting.
That's
So
true. But this is limited, this is very limited.
So I appreciate the limitedness of it, and I think it makes it more likely to succeed. But I think it's helpful to understand the rationale when you're making a change. This is a change, this is a big change, to have a non-resident serve in an elected position.
In a non-voting capacity. It says
I don't know.
No, it doesn't.
If they're,
Till
the
the end of their
alternative is to be
term.
appointed as a non-voting associate member within 18 months.
That's the second part, but
That's
the first part.
First part is they continue to.
And it's only 18 months,
Right, so
their term, sorry.
yes, I hear the limits, I appreciate the limits, and it's helpful to understand the rationale. And like, you gave a great example of a reason why it would be a useful thing.
Yes, and in this example, for if you try to apply this to the other committee that I'm on, which is capital improvements doesn't have public hearings. So it's by its very nature, it's not required to have public hearings that comport with Massachusetts general law where a decision has to be made with respect to zoning. So to Chris's point, if another committee or board felt that they wanted to do it, they would have to justify it.
well, to Mary, so I think the easy answer for Mary is, if another committee wanted to do the same thing, they'd have to do the same process.
Yeah.
Request it, it would have to go through vote, or the recommendations, and then the vote of the town.
Right, and I think I think about what other boards and committees in the town do stuff with laws, conservation commissions, for example. I could imagine when the solar farm out the other side of town was going through, that was a long process, involved Conservation Commission, could have had a similar thing. So clearly zoning and planning figured out this was something they needed. But I think in terms of us understanding, and yeah, right, if conservation wants it, they could then, they could see how it worked well for zoning and planning, and they could, come ask it. But I think, yeah, that's.
I also didn't want to take up too much air if you had anything to add.
Would this person be counted for a quorum?
Oh, sorry.
Well, you ask your stuff, and George, then I'll give you the floor.
Will this person be, they're a non-voting member, but can you count them as present for a quorum? Remember, some committees have trouble, a lot of committees have trouble getting members, and you have to have, so many members there to have your meeting.
I know from Jeff, and I'll have George, he's on the board, speak to this, but I know from Jeff that was one of the reasons, is to have a quorum in the committee to sustain the committee, which is by law, we have to maintain that committee.
So they would be there, so you would have a legal meeting, but that person couldn't vote.
But there's two parts to this.
There's two parts
to this. The first part, they'd be a full voting member. If I was a planning board member, I moved to Whately, and for the rest of my term, I would be a regular planning board member voting.
Still be able to vote, yes.
And voting. Then there's the second part, which is appointing somebody 18 months, whatever. But anyway, that's.
Yes. And there may have found a distinction that there's really two parts to it.
Introduce yourself a little louder first.
Okay. George Forcier, Planning Board Chair.
Thank you.
Mary's right, there's two pieces to this. The first part is current elected member of the board who moves out of town for whatever reason and is basically would be allowed to serve out the rest of his or her term with regular voting powers. The second part pertains to associate members. And that's part of the answer to the question about why the zoning and planning boards. State enabling legislation allows for associate members on planning and zoning boards. And to my knowledge, not on school committees or other committees.
Conservation.
And it's because planning and zoning boards are sort of quasi-judicial in the nature of what they do with respect to special permits and variances. So it's important to have a 4/5, sort of super majority to vote on some of these permits, and therefore it's important to have full ranks. And as you all know, because many of you are on the boards and have been, it's really tough to fill all our seats, so it gets challenging sometimes to have the quorum needed to do some of these permits. So the second half specifically is about associate members. We are allowed an associate member on the planning board by state law. And we have had an associate member for a number of years, who had 40 years experience as a town planning board member and selectman. He left town and we discovered, gosh, we don't have our associate member. It's kind of like that 13th juror in a murder trial where they sit in the wings, and if someone of the 12 becomes sick, that juror slips in and votes. And that's how associate members would work, or do work. And in this case, we're just trying to make it easier to have associate members. Right now, the planning board's functioning with, 4 members out of 5, and no associate. So we're right on the knife's edge in terms of having the people power that we need. So this would make it easier to staff up, if you will. But that non-resident associate member would be someone under the selectmen's thumb, because it's a 1-year appointment, and they would control that. Ideally, you'd have an associate member who's currently living in town, obviously. So those are the points I wanted to make. Yes?
Sandra Farkas, just to follow up with that issue, is there a reason that with the first clause of that, the person who's been elected and then moves out of town, that person wouldn't also become an associate member?
The way it was written, it allows such a person to then be appointed by the selectmen to be an associate. But it prevents such a person from becoming a regular full voting member beyond the original term of their election.
But is there a reason why we wouldn't want to make that person become an associate member once they move out of town? So in other words, they move out, now they go from being a full member to an associate member?
And we might have an associate member in such a scenario, right? Normally, you'd want to have an associate member and 5 planning board members. And if then in that scenario, number 5 leaves town, there'd be no associate seat for him or her to go to. So, that's the only scenario I can think of. There may be times like right now where there's a vacant associate seat and a vacant planning board seat, and you have a lot of room for help. But we're happy with this arrangement, which keeps the elected non-resident powers to a minimum, right? So the rest of their term, and then that's that. If there were a vacant associate seat, that person might very well ask the selectmen to continue serving the board, but in the associate capacity.
If you have a committee of 5 people, up to 5, you have 3 people on that committee. If you have less than that, you have no committee. Let's say you have those 3 people voted yearly at town meeting. One of those people either moves, gets injured, even worse, then you have nothing.
Understood.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to join the planning board, or the board of assessors, for that matter.
Yeah, I think this makes good sense, and for another reason beyond having a quorum and voting and so on. And that is that we were just talking about Joe. We might find ourselves in a situation where somebody on a board is working on a project and really has most of the knowledge, the expertise, really focused on this project, and then they have to leave in the middle of the project. So it's very important, I think, to have that continuity, if it's available to us, by having an associate member, by having a person stay on, at least to be able to hand it off to somebody else on the board. So I think it makes very good sense for that reason as well.
All right. How about Article 33? Oops. Yeah, I don't know why. Yeah. To see if the town will vote to amend Article 5 definitions of the protective zoning bylaws by striking and replacing the definition of dwelling unit and adding the following definitions. So this actually encompasses 33 and kind of 34 too, is that correct? Or
Yes.
just 33?
35 technically as well.
Yeah, so there's 3 articles that kind of get encompassed in this, and I was hoping you could speak to them.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I have to use the restroom, but can you mention the difference between a apartment ADU that's existing within an existing structure and a separate structure ADU?
I'll do my best.
Thank you.
Let's start with the basics. Everyone know what an accessory dwelling unit is, generally speaking, right? The mother-in-law apartment. Maybe it should be the father-in-law apartment. So currently, the town zoning allows accessory dwelling units, but they're restricted in certain ways unique to Conway. Today, they have to exist within an existing dwelling. So I can take my big old colonial and carve out a piece of it, put a kitchen and bathroom in there, and presto, it's an accessory dwelling unit. I can build an addition to my existing house. I think Ellen Zale just built a 1,100 square foot addition to her home, moved herself into it, and her kids took over her old house. That's allowed. Today, there's
They
no...
have to be attached, right?
It's attached. It's attached dwelling. Ellen could not have built those 1,100 square feet as a detached, separate structure. That would not be allowed. It would be considered 2 dwellings on a single lot. All right. So we were happy with that, I guess. I don't know that many of those were built in town. My understanding from Joe Stragowski was that when that was adopted years ago, it was to encourage more housing in town. More people would build more ADUs. Interestingly, not only that, but currently, I can take my big old colonial and I can cut it in half and make a duplex by right. No special permits are required. And then I can build a little bump out for an accessory dwelling unit. So I can have essentially 3 dwellings on my lot. But that's all. Okay, so that's...
And it has to be owner occupied, right?
I don't know. I want to say no, but I'm not 100% sure. That was the state of affairs until the state legislature the last year adopted a new ADU law that overrode all the local bylaws and set some parameters for ADUs in every city and town in the state. And we all have to fit into that state protocol. So we've had to recommend these changes to our zoning definitions and other things that relate to the ADUs to comply with the state rules. The state's trying to encourage more ADUs to help with housing, just like Conway did originally. So they want to make it easier. Apparently a lot of the towns in the eastern part of the state make it difficult to have ADUs or ban them altogether. The state now, the new law, does not allow a community to ban ADUs. You can't do it. You have to allow ADUs, and there's certain rules the state has set, and there's a little wiggle room locally to tweak the state law. So this represents our best effort to fit the state law around what we did originally. So let's change. Under this provision in the state law, you can have detached ADUs in Conway. So I could build a structure 200 feet from my network, some distance from my principal dwelling, and that'd be okay. Can't do it until we pass this. Previously, you could build an ADU of almost any size. There's no restriction on the size of it. You could build an ADU for your in-laws that was 3 times the size of your house. The state puts a restriction on that. The state says the accessory dwelling can't be any more than half the size of the principal dwelling, or 900 square feet, whichever is smaller. So essentially 900 square feet is the ceiling, which I don't know how to describe 900 square feet.
That is space, that is the pad. You can build up.
No, it's 900 square feet of living space. So if it was a 2-story ADU, it'd be 450.
So above ground living is 900. I thought it was just the pad.
Living space. So 900 square feet, what is that, like a 2-bedroom ranch maybe? Pretty small. Smaller than that
Tiny home.
probably. 900 square feet. I'm trying to picture something that's 900 square feet.
Yeah, a tiny home.
The transportation mall.
Bigger than a tiny house.
You don't think? That's true.
Our old house on Main Forward Road.
With 900 square feet.
There you go.
It's like one floor of a CSP house. One of the
Yeah.
standard houses.
It's a standard
But
floors where,
900,
yeah.
20 by 20.
Yeah, 3 bedrooms,
So,
1 bathroom,
yeah, it's a pretty small space.
small bedrooms.
Yeah.
Well, the older you get, the bigger that space looks.
Yeah, really. So the maximum number of dwellings on a lot won't change in our version of this. People can still by right have, carve up their house or build a duplex in Conway. A lot of people don't realize that, but you buy a lot and you can plunk a duplex on it. With these changes, you also will be able to have by right an accessory dwelling unit. It can be attached, it could be inside one of those, that original principal dwelling, or it could be detached. No special permit required. That's a change. You just have to get a special permit. If you want to build more than one ADU, apparently the state will let you do that, but in Conway you would have to get a special permit. build more than 3 dwellings on that lot.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said if that doesn't get passed by the town, then you can't do it. So what's the state law got to do with it?
If this doesn't pass, Conway rules revert to the state law and regulations. It's not just the law. The law is, pretty brief. There's this whole this list of regulations that the bureaucracy created, and it would tell us that 900 square feet, detached. It would probably, we might have to go to the AG's office and get a reading on the duplex issue in Conway, because it's different and not really imagined by the ADU drafters at the state level. There'd be some tweaks, but if someone came to the planning board and said, I want an ADU, we would have to go to the state regs and look at them and see how they apply.
So what is the difference between the state regs and what you're proposing with these articles?
The duplex provision is different. That's a wrinkle in Conway that other towns don't necessarily have. And the rules around the detached dwelling, because we set in these provisions, we set 100 feet as a radius for the ADU if it's detached, trying to keep it kind of like a campus, so that I couldn't build an ADU, on the back 40 someplace, without planning board, kind of a waiver from the planning board. So we're trying to encourage people to keep these buildings clustered using the same driveway and maybe other facilities too. Let's see, what have I forgotten to say? Maximum number of dwellings is the same, 3. 900 square feet. The ADU is by right, although we would ask for a site plan review, where the planning board looks at your site plan and makes suggestions perhaps if it seems awkward or problematical for road laws.
So they still have to go through Board of Health and that?
Yes.
Septic and all
Board of
that,
Health will still have to deal with septic issues and wells. Currently, an ADU must be internal. That's not the case anymore. We say within 100 feet. Currently, the owner of the principal dwelling must occupy, this is to the point you made, currently, the owner of the principal dwelling must occupy either the principal dwelling or the ADU, but not necessarily both. The amendment strikes the occupancy requirement. The state law no longer allows you to do that, meaning that any or all dwellings or ADUs may be rented. It's not optional.
So like in Amherst, they had ADUs for a while, but with all the school UMass students needed housing, they had an owner occupancy thing, so it just didn't become student apartments everywhere, fallen down buildings, not cared for, with no owner keeping an eye on things. So that was the goal, but that's out now, so that may affect how things are kept.
But it strikes that owner occupancy requirement.
At the state level.
The state provision, So we have no choice but to accept that. And if you don't accept it in this local version, that would apply at the state level anyway. Okay, those are the key differences between what we have now and what we will be getting.
Yeah, I mean, the huge difference is the detached vehicles.
Yes.
I mean, when I was on the planning board, I mean, there's, for those of us who've been around a while, you know where Fred and Jean's is on, like the Fred, what was it called, Fred and Jean's, the old restaurant, that building.
Yeah.
That the person who owned that wanted to make that into a dwelling unit, and that was not, it was not attached unless you like built an attachment to the house. That was not allowed. Now that could be an apartment.
Yes.
That could be an apartment. And so that is a big change in general.
Yeah.
And In the past, there had been all sorts of concern about the notion of it attached. And I'd be curious to hear, see what people think in town meeting. I know a lot of towns, and the city of Greenfield's going through all sorts of ADU stuff. A lot of towns are looking at this ADU issue, looking at the issue of whether, because there's not the owner-occupied thing now, and because there's a trend in the real estate market of private equity firms buying single-family houses, and then adding things, doing things that could then, change, like to have much more rental property. Conway has a shortage of rental property, so actually having some more rental properties would be a great thing, I think, personally. This is my personal viewpoint. But I really would hope for town meeting, like as Ron was saying, well, what's the difference between it'd be great to see the sort of little chart. Old Conway rules, new proposed Conway rules, state rules, to see, what's the same, what's different. And the rationale for, was one of the things that could have been done in Conway was just to say, we'll just take what the state regs say. And what I'm hearing is you're doing a combination of using what Conway had before and adjusting that based on the new state rules. So it'd be great to hear that sort of comparison.
The presumption was that some years ago, Conway adopted the ADU and duplex divisions in order to encourage housing in town. And so we started by trying to preserve that and then satisfying the state requirements at the same time.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
That was a good
A lot
explanation.
of work on that.
Sure.
A lot of work on that.
Yeah. Okay, so I know we're 5 minutes out, but this is the deal. We've been through 11 articles. Discussion of what, we've never done that. Not in a billion years. That may be an exaggeration, but we have not. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I would like to thank the large number of people on committees and boards, the select board. We had a lot of, Chief of Police, Donnie Bates, Ron Sweet, Highway Department, Bob Baker, Fire Department. We had great representation here tonight. And nothing went unexplained, I do not believe, which is wonderful and odd.